Welcome to Making with Mark. In this video, I'll build this German tiger tank. Stick around to see how I made it. For this build, I'm starting with a tank that I built out of cardboard and epoxy some time ago. I never finished it, and now it's time to make that happen. But before I do, I want to get down to a smooth surface to work off of. So I'm going to be taking some bits and pieces off that I had added originally, and I really think I can do a better job this go around anyway. It didn't take long for the pieces and parts to start piling up. Some I'll keep, and some I'll save for another day. This turret opening is one of the pieces that I want to retain, and you'll see in a moment how I reuse it. To start the rebuilding process, I need to smooth and sand out where these parts were attached. Using my rotary tool, I grind these down nice and smooth. With that out of the way, now it's time to use this spackling to smooth the entire surface out. With a layer of spackling on, things were starting to look good. The more I worked on the tank, the less I liked these remaining bits and pieces that were left on there from before, so I took those off. And then after taking a look at the turret, I thought it needed to be cut down just a little bit. This back toolbox portion especially was a little too big. Next, I filled in the gaps on the side with new pieces of cardboard, and then I topped the whole thing off with another coat of the spackling. Next, I moved to the front of the tank, and again applied a layer of spackling just to smooth things out and to hide the rough edges where the little bits and pieces had been glued on before. Then I moved on to the sides. The edges here were a little rough, and you can actually see the corrugations in the cardboard under the epoxy. Made my way around the back to these fenders, and you'll notice I left some bits initially on the back. This is the exhaust piece and some other little bits and pieces for detail. And off camera, I went ahead and took those off as well. Next, I started sanding all around the areas where I had added the spackling. And this took a good bit of work to get everything smooth, and in certain cases I went back and added 2 or 3 additional little coats of the spackling. Here you can see I'm just filling in a little seam along the back of the tank, and honestly it was just easier to do this with my finger than to try to use any other kind of tools, but it worked out pretty well. After applying a coat of primer, you can really start to tell what the tank is going to look like when it's finished. This is a really exciting part of each project, and I can't wait to get started with more of the details. Now it's time to turn my attention back to the turret. So again, I'm reusing the old turret that I had taken off earlier. So I'll start off by just scuffing up the surface of the top and bottom, and then I used some of this sheet styrene and some super glue just to create a nice solid top piece. I trim that with my construction scissors. And then using my rotary tool and some sandpaper, I clean up that edge to be really nice and smooth. I added some additional details, added some glue to the bottom, then positioned it and glued it in place. Now it's on to making some of these metal hatches and doors for the top of the turret. So more sheet styrene, just cut those out to the approximate size I wanted, and then around the edges I used my rotary tool with the sanding wheel. And then I line those up where I want them to be. And with some super glue, just glue those in place along with some other little bits and pieces for detail. Next, I cut some strips of styrene for the handles and hinges for these lids on top of the turret. I followed the same process with all the different hatches and openings on top of the turret. Added the handles and then some other little bits and pieces just for detail. These will really shine whenever we get into the weathering and distressing part of the painting. To make the vents on the top back of the tank, I found this mesh screen. I cut it out into rectangular shapes, glued it on, and then outlined it with some more strips of styrene. Next, I added details like cables and rivets and various other little bits and pieces to the top of the tank for some added detail. For the exhaust and guards on the back of the tank, I used some more of the sheet styrene, cut it out into rectangles. Then I created some inner pieces to actually hold the rounded shape. I glued those in place. Then I used my cutting wheel on my rotary tool to notch out the top edges. Then I placed a plastic washer, some little plastic pipe, and some little beads as details just to round out the end of that exhaust port. Went ahead and glued both of the exhaust pieces in place, and we're looking pretty good. And I had these little pieces of plastic pipe with metal caps on them from another project. I actually did not use them on one of the previous droids that I built, but I thought they would come in really great for these canisters on the back of the tank. So I glued them together. I found these cool metal inserts that looked just what I was looking for, and then put a band of the sheet styrene around it to hold them. Then I glued those in place, added some other little bits and details, and I was pretty happy with the way they turned out. For these pipes on the back of the tank, I just used some flexible drinking straws, cut them to length, bent them to the shape I wanted them, and then glued them in with some super glue. Then it's time to go ahead and start building the tread on the tracks, and for this I used some little matchsticks cut to the correct width. I glued those on with some super glue and just worked my way all the way around the tank. And with a couple of coats of primer applied, now it's time to start working on detailing those tracks. I start off with a base color of black, and then I'll go back over that later with several weathering stages. There'll be some browns and orange and just some grungy, rusty colors. But first, I've got to get a good uniform background here of black. So I work my way around, making sure I get all the nooks and crannies. Once I have that complete, I focus on this outer rim of the wheels. So I just want to add this band of paint around each one, and that's going to add some character to the wheels and really draw your eye to the details of those wheels. Continuing on, paint the exhaust portion in the back of the tank black. And then these pipes that come from the back of the turret over to these canisters, I painted gray. And I use this nutmeg acrylic color to start doing some of the weathering. So first I just dab on just randomly dab, some of the thinned paint, and then I dab it off with a damp paper towel. I just keep working my way around the tank in different areas doing the same thing. Making my way around the back, you can see what that weathering technique will do. I wanted to really draw some attention to the back upper part of the tank where the exhaust would be. I wanted that to be extra grungy. And then the sides as well. So here I'm using that same technique going down the sides. Once I had the weathering on the main body, I focused some attention on the wheels. So same technique. I just brushed on the brown and then dabbed it off. Now I'm coming back in with this sort of grungy gray. Next, I began layering dirt and mud on that black base coat of the tracks. And then to create this cross logo on the side of the turret, I just used some masking tape, cut out the shape, and then stuck it on one side at a time. And then I used some black acrylic paint to dab in the background color. I went back later after that was finished, made sure it was good and dry, and then I brushed in the white details. And then I continued layering on different grungy shades for the weathering coats. And it took several layers to achieve the results that I wanted. You can tell this one is a good bit darker than the previous coat that I did, but I'm still going to use the same procedure. I just dab it on, and I like to work in, small areas at a time. And then I'll go behind that with a damp paper towel and just sponge away most of the paint. Now I'm going to speed things up here a bit, but I did want to take a little bit of extra time to show this process. I've had several viewers ask questions about the weathering and how I do it. So I wanted to show a little bit more this time so you can sort of see how I go about doing the dabbing and just blotting off the paint. And hopefully this will help for all of you who've asked. I really appreciate it. Feel free to keep those questions coming. I'm happy to share anything that I do, share techniques and materials and that sort of things with you guys. To round out this project, I continue the same process, working all the way around all of the nice, clean parts of the tank. So I'll finish the turret and then get the upper part of the tank, make sure all the sides look good. And then I stand back and just do a look at the whole piece as one and just make sure that shadows are in the right places, things are balanced out pretty well. And then to top it off, I finish things up with a little bit of silver dry brushing, and this is just to accent some of the wear and tear, especially with things like gun barrels and cables and wires. And I have to say, this was a really fun project. I'm glad I got to complete it, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. If you enjoyed this video, check out these others that I think you'll also enjoy.